Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're objectively deconstructing a truly fascinating, really sweeping piece of historical rhetoric. Reverend Sun Myung Moon's 1984 speech titled, "Let Us Go Over the Hill." Whether you're a history buff, a student of religious movements, or just kind of curious about the wild intersection of intense ideology and Cold War geopolitics, well, there is a massive amount to unpack here. We're strictly sticking to the source material today to understand the core themes Moon presented to his followers and, crucially, exactly what he demanded of them.
Right off the bat, to give you an immediate sense of the sheer scale and style of his rhetoric, just listen to this quote. God is using Reverend Moon as a hook and bait to catch the gigantic tuna of the religious world. I mean, it's a completely bizarre and striking metaphor, isn't it? Moon regularly used this kind of vivid, grandiose imagery to describe his cosmic role in world affairs. He wasn't just talking about leading a local church, he was framing the whole movement as a global, world-altering force. So, how exactly did he plan to catch this gigantic tuna? Let's break down the core ideological pillars from his speech.
Now, what's really interesting here is our first core pillar, Section 1, Creating the Eternal Fatherland. Moon frames his followers, and really all historically religious people, as the gypsies of the 20th century, looking forward to our permanent settlement in the true fatherland. He basically argues that throughout history, religious devotees have never had a true God-centered nation to actually call their permanent home. You see, he's building this narrative of historical homelessness to create a really deep, urgent yearning for a physical, spiritual settlement.
And the speech explicitly designates the year 1984 as the pivotal moment of transition, giving them a very direct slogan, creation and building of the fatherland. He's telling his followers that the time for wandering is officially over. It's a massive call to action. They are transitioning from being spiritual nomads to actively constructing this eternal settlement. But, how exactly do you build a God-centered nation from scratch?
Well, that brings us to our second pillar, Section 2, Embracing Sacrifice and Indemnity.
To really wrap our heads around this, we have to unpack the Unification Church's concept of indemnity, which essentially means paying a sacrificial price through hardship, tears, and unconditional service to write a textbook for world salvation. What's absolutely fascinating here is how Moon directly challenges his Western audience. He notes that Americans are joyful, fun-loving people who just don't naturally like the concept of indemnity or suffering. Yet he's asking them to not only endure this profound hardship, but to literally do it willingly and with absolute joy.
Let's see how this builds. Moon uses a powerful central motif of climbing the mountain. Notice how this sacrifice has to scale upwards. It starts with the individual, then it moves to the family, up to the clan and tribe, the nation, the world, and cosmos, until it ultimately reaches God. It's this highly structured, escalating framework where personal suffering pays the price for higher and higher levels of spiritual victory.
And guys, this isn't just abstract theology. It translates into highly specific, physical actions. He asks his followers to completely forego chairs and just sit on the floor. He tells them to embrace a sleeping bag culture so they can pack up and move anywhere at a moment's notice. He instructs his missionaries to reject special comforts in poor nations and really emphasizes the need to physically weep with the suffering. He frames these things not as mere poverty, but as deliberate, rigorous cultural training designed to break down personal barriers.
Moving on to the massive ideological enemy blocking their path up the mountain. Section 3, the War Against Communism.
Central to this third pillar is VOC, or Victory Over Communism. Moon defines this as a theological and ideological defense aimed at preventing the global spread of communist ideology. Keep in mind, this is 1984, right in the thick of the Cold War. Moon positions his movement not just as a religious group, but as the only viable defense against an ideology he calls the ultimate enemy of God. He argues that the secular free world is currently failing this critical test.
To grasp the sheer, breathtaking scale of his ambitions, consider this target number: 70 million. Moon explicitly reveals his stated goal of recruiting 70 million VOC members globally. That's practically the population of a major country. He isn't aiming for a small coalition. He is trying to mount a massive, worldwide ideological offensive to completely turn the geopolitical tide. It's a numbers game on a truly cosmic scale.
Now, look at how he brilliantly merges theology with geopolitics here. Moon maps the Cold War divide directly onto the biblical story of the two thieves crucified next to Jesus. The left thief represents the communist world, which he says accuses enemies and assaults God by claiming he doesn't exist. The right thief represents the free world, which acknowledges God. But here's the catch. Moon says the free world must now actively support the true parents, meaning Moon and his wife, just as the right thief sympathize with Jesus. It's an incredibly stark, binary worldview.
Furthermore, Moon asserts that the nature of global conflict has fundamentally changed. He highlights to his audience that conventional military conflict has essentially been replaced by three modern arenas: ideological warfare, intelligence forces warfare, and propaganda warfare. He claims that in these three specific arenas, his movement is uniquely dominant and equipped to outmaneuver the communist bloc, even when superpowers like the United States are struggling.
Which naturally leads us to our final thematic pillar. Section 4. Reverend Moon's Cosmic Role.
The speech lays out a very specific theology regarding sacrifice. Moon teaches that a cosmic sacrifice was demanded by Satan and approved by God to allow mankind to cross the mountain. In Moon's worldview, sacrifice is fundamentally a high-stakes transaction. God requires a universally precious offering to silence Satan's accusations and actually allow humanity to advance spiritually.
But this theology takes a deeply personal and tragic turn in the speech. Moon incorporates the recent death of his own second son, Hyung-jin Nim, into this cosmic transaction. He states, "Since special indemnity was paid that protected me in Korea, Satan hit Hyung-jin Nim instead at the same exact hour." He is framing his son's fatal car accident not as a random tragedy, but as a substitute sacrifice that satisfied Satan's demands, and in doing so, protected Moon himself and the Korean nation from calamity. So, the crucial point is how this translates to everyday life. Section 5. Spiritual Protection and Loyalty.
Moon gives his followers a very specific, tangible instruction. He says that carrying his picture acts as a spiritual antenna. He details that followers must carry his photo on their identification cards, promising that it actively invites angelic protection from deadly calamities. He even draws a direct biblical parallel, comparing the act of carrying his picture to the Israelites painting the blood of the lamb on their doorways during the Exodus in Egypt. He's literalizing spiritual protection into a physical object they must keep on them at all times. And to prove the sheer effectiveness of this discipline, Moon highlights a staggering logistical feat: a mass wedding of 6,000 couples that he organized in Korea with only 2 weeks' notice. I mean, people literally dropped everything and flew in from all over the world. This anecdote brilliantly illustrates the intense, military-like discipline and the total unquestioning obedience that he commands from his global followers.
And he tests this obedience in some pretty extreme ways. He tells his audience that they must embrace absolute humility. He shares a striking, visceral anecdote suggesting that his Western followers might need to learn traditional Korean farming methods that actually use human waste as fertilizer. By asking his followers if they'd be willing to literally work with human waste with their bare hands, Moon is testing whether they can view the world without external prejudice and totally surrender their cultural comforts.
As we wrap up our analysis, we return to the central driving motif. Moon ends his address by leading the audience in a chanted pledge, repeating the phrase, "We shall go over the hill." It's a powerful rallying cry to march forward against all odds, against all persecution, and despite any personal discomfort. He is cementing their collective identity as an unstoppable, singular force.
Which brings us to a final thought. Throughout this speech, Moon makes immense, world-altering demands. At one point, he even explicitly challenges his young American audience, asking if they would be willing to go on an espionage mission to the Soviet Union for his cause. So looking at the pure scope of this 1984 address, it leaves us with a provocative question to ponder. Would you be willing to sacrifice your comforts, your home, and even risk your life on an espionage mission for a vision like this? It's a fascinating glimpse into the intense mechanics of ideological commitment. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.